Hello. Hey, hey.
Yes, so we were away for a while. We did our 1 year anniversary episode a few weeks ago, and I know you went on vacation. I'm in the middle of moving. How's everything going?
Pretty good.
Yeah,
Took the took the little tot over to family over in the Northeast and got to
nice.
see all the family and everything.
Awesome. So yeah, while you were away on vacation, Opus 5 came out. Um I know that I have mixed feelings about it. I I've also started to, back I think episode 33 or 32, I looked at Cursor and we covered it here, and I was experimenting with Composer. This was pre the SpaceX acquisition. So it's about a few months ago. And ever since then, I'd been using Cursor, mixing Cursor with Claude Code, using it, to do code reviews in Crow and use it for schedule jobs and manager sessions, um, but not for main coding. And now I actually, when I run out of quota, I use Crow to flip between harnesses using Cursor, using Grok 4.5, using Composer. Although I found Composer to be pretty decent. So yeah, would love to kind of hear your kind of sort of gut, feedback on Opus 5.
Well, I had to go research how to change a model in Claude Code because if you do slash model, it only gives you a few choices, and the only Opus choice is Opus 5. So I was like, "Are you kidding me? You're locking me into Opus 5?" So I had to research how to actually change model, and there's a way to put in a string to get it directly to 4.8. I am done with Opus 5. I mean, I know you say you have mixed feelings, but mine are pretty unmixed. They're pretty, mine is just one feeling. I think it sucks. Um, I've used it for quite a while, um, for about a week or so since it came out. I've been using it for all my coding tasks, and it is just, it's horrible in my opinion. It it's always replying no matter what your task is with paragraphs and paragraphs after what it's done, and then within that paragraph is always like follow-ups, like you're like finish this ticket, and you know Opus 4.8 will finish the ticket, and then occasionally it'll be like here's a follow-up or something like that. um, Now it's with Opus 5, it's like there's always a follow up. No matter how simple your task is, it's always like, hey, we should do this follow up. I'll make another ticket. So it's like you finish a ticket and it creates two more tickets for you. And then you finish those two tickets and it creates two more tickets for you. And then code reviews are even worse. If you use Opus 5 to do code reviews, you will never get out of a code review cycle. It will it'll request changes on the code review, with some pretty decent reasons. The person will fix it, and then it will request changes again with completely new stuff that it didn't mention the first time. Maybe some of them are relevant. And you fix them, and it will do it again and do it again. You get like 15 rounds into this, and you're like, what the hell is going on? You're starting to like create bugs just from the back and forth. It's an
It's sort of
absolute mess.
it's sort of like the model is really good at what it does, but also is it is it too good at what it does as a mechanism to get you to burn through as many tokens as possible, accomplishing the same thing that you could have accomplished with 4.8, but it's almost like a drug dealer that's keeping you hooked, creating more work for you that doesn't necessarily like need to be done, or you know I mean, it's working as Anthropic intended.
Mm-hmm.
Is it maybe not designed for the types of workflows that maybe doing coding tasks, um
I mean,
maybe
if it's
needs.
better than 4.8,
Mm-hmm.
it's better in a way like the next version of the iPhone is at this point. It's
Mm-hmm.
like, you know, incrementally better in some way that you probably won't notice. Um, but you know what you really will notice is all the bad things about it because they actually stop you from getting work. I mean, they completely blew up code reviews, and you have to turn your attention to now figure out what the hell's going on with code reviews.
Mm-hmm.
So to me, Opus 4.5 is like the first time that I would consider it a true model, like a regression. Like I feel like it's a mistake to even release it. It's not ready. If it is better, which I'm sure it is better than 4.8 at some things, like those things will not be noticeable because of all the bad things. At least in my
Mm-hmm.
experience, it isn't.
Mm-hmm.
So I moved back to 4.8 and right away I got a better experience. And I don't notice anything that's bad about 4.8 in comparison to 4
So
comparison to 5.
if you were to sum up, like, for somebody that is not attuned to how a model works, why is Opus 5 worse at what it's doing than 4.8? Like, what is it doing under the hood that causes it to take longer than usual to accomplish a task? Meaning, like, all this extra work that's being created, or code reviews that are nitpicky.
Well, I'd have to guess
Yeah.
because it's I don't have the ability to go in there and say for 100% what it is. But I've heard talk, at least in their promotions, when they were promoting it as like a positive of how it was different, they added like kind of like a critique inside of it, kind of similar to how like
A
Grok Heavy
council
was in the
works.
beginning, like a council or at least something that second guesses itself as part of its own process. And if I had to guess, I think whatever that thing is that's critiquing is like always trying to find something. And
Mm-hmm.
then the main model that's being critiqued, the main portion, whatever you want to call it, of Opus 5 that's being critiqued, always adds that critique in at the end of what it's doing when it's finished. So you're never done. And it makes sense. The code reviews always have more things it finds, no matter how many things you fix. The When you finish a task, it always finds a follow-up or something. Like I was watching a podcast the other day and it was kind of like tongue in cheek or laughing, but it's actually true. Like this was a real thing. You will tell it to go rename a variable, and it will come back and be like, I renamed the variable, but by the way, we should go check because this could have broken something else that's using that variable. And it's like, why didn't you do that, right? Like,
Mm-hmm.
why are you telling me to go check whether a variable, like, it'll explain to you the negative ramifications and then create some sort of follow up that you feel compelled to go down because now you don't trust it anymore. It's like, why didn't you just come back and say, I renamed the variable properly? I checked all these places. Like 4.8 would have just said, I've researched these places, I fixed it. Maybe 4.8 would have missed a spot and you would have had a build error, but I'd rather have the build error and then the extra turn of 4.8 going, oh yeah, I missed that part, let me fix it,
Mm-hmm.
than have Opus 5 probably still get the build error and miss something, but then like constantly second guessing itself and giving you more work to go look at, no matter how easy the task is that you give it.
Yeah.
Um, yeah, it's to me, it it's the first time that a new model update has blocked work for me. Like literally lost a day of work because of it, uh, in aggregate, of going back and forth with it over the course of a week until eventually I just had enough. And I was like,
So
you know what?
let's
I'm not using it.
so let's turn to cursor for a second, because I think that's where we're both landing in terms of what I have noticed in the last few weeks is I am doing I'm doing more, I'm producing more, and Crow really allows me to parallelize my work, and we'll talk about parallelization versus serialization and agent
Mm-hmm.
handoff in later on in graph engineering. But what I've noticed is that my weekly quota doesn't go as far as it used to. And I don't know if that's an Opus 5 thing or not. Um, it may be attributed to, like, some code reviews that I had done a few weeks ago that were like, 20 turn code reviews, ping ponging back and forth
Yeah.
with another crow. So I started to use Cursor for coding sessions, and I'm noticing that the my quota. I'm on like a $200 account now, but I was on a $20 account for a long time, and
Hmm.
then $60 account. I'm just finding that uh, my dollar goes a lot further with Cursor right now, just right now. So
Well, the nice thing about Cursor, well, what's funny is if you go all the way back to the early podcast episodes, there was a point at which I was saying if you're not using Claude Code at this point, you're not doing you're not on the latest, you're not on the bleeding edge. Like folks who are using Cursor were having a diminished experience. It was a fork of VS Code, or like, it was in VS Code, it looked like VS Code, etc. Um, Now it's, they have the CLI, they have their own app. I use the CLI, the
it
the
was
TUI.
actually 1 year ago today, episode
Yeah,
3. Yep.
yeah. And I basically told everyone if you're using Cursor, you're not on the latest and greatest of what you could be doing. Claude Code was the only game in town back then. Since then, I've had an episode where I've said, Codex is now part of that crew. You can do serious work with Codex. Cursor, became part of that crew again at some point in the past, but I hadn't been using it, so I don't know when it was. But I can tell you at this point that I think that Cursor may be taking the lead. Not necessarily from Codex. I think Codex is still up there too. Um, but Cursor has gotten back into the mix for sure, probably some time ago when I wasn't using it. And Claude is kind of diminishing, in my
Mm-hmm.
opinion.
Mm-hmm.
It feels chunky and bloated, and it feels like it's starting to plateau,
Mm-hmm.
and it's getting worse. Like they keep on coming out with models that seriously regress. Um, some of those I wasn't really affected by in the past, but I've heard a lot of chatter from others. This one is definitely one that hurts. Um, and then what? And then I've also been using Cursor more now. One thing that got me back into Cursor was the fact that their subscription allows API keys. So for the folks out there who are like, when I put Claude into GitHub into the pipelines, now I got to do token costs. And by the way, for anyone out there using per token cost for Claude, I'm sure you're having meetings every day about how to optimize your token usage, and you're looking for different skills or frameworks or plugins that, caveman speak, ooga booga. It's I'll tell you, I work with a lot of large companies, who are in this mix right now, and they're all failing. And the reason why is because the token costs are. I don't even think it's possible to. I think the token costs for Anthropic models, when you're on the per token, not the subscription. The subscriptions are great. The per token cost for Anthropic, I think, are so high that even though magic has landed on this earth with AI, I think the magic is too expensive for it to be profitable with token usage on Anthropic. They've priced everyone out of the market, and I've said this kind of personally to some people. I think that Anthropic has hit peak. I think it's all. I think they're going to drop market share from here. They're data center constrained. You have SpaceX AI starting to um, get to the top. And then also, Anthropic is leasing data centers just to keep alive from SpaceX. SpaceX could kick them off, and they'd be in trouble. Um, but anyway, back to Cursor subscriptions. When you start using Anthropic is very opinionated about using Claude Code to do backend stuff. Like if you were to set it up as like a service that does something behind the scenes in a headless mode, they don't let you use their subscription, their subsidized pricing. Cursor does. Cursor lets you use an API key and still get their subsidized pricing. Their subsidized pricing goes way further, like you were saying before, especially
Mm-hmm.
if you're using Grok or you're using Composer, which go even further under their pricing. And then at the $200 level, if you buy it for a year, which full disclosure, I haven't yet, but if you buy it for the year, it's only $160 a month. So think of that as like buy it for your back end services for a year. If you're, building an application if you're in the application, if you have a startup in the application layer building on something on top of LLM providers, uh, and you might be thinking about using managed agents from Anthropic or one of these other, sort of uh, harness as a service, you should really look into Cursor subscriptions with Composer or Grok 4.5, now Grok 4.6 that just came out, because it goes so far and they don't care if you use it for back end services. So you could set up your own Anthropic managed services internally within your organization and just start rocking. Like at a subsidized price, you can start offering the subsidized usage to your own users and clients. Um, it's great. I'm very, very close. I can now see into the future and see myself eventually canceling my Cloud Code account and moving entirely to Cursor, and maybe also Codex, because
Mm,
you always want to have some sort of backup.
nice. So, um, so this week on Tool of the Week, I started to like wrap my head around what graph engineering is. We covered loop engineering a while back. It's a little bit of a buzzword. I wanted to demystify it a little bit. I'm not sure I fully grasp it even after doing it. I think we kind of do some of this already in how we actually work day to day. But so like here's the kind of like hook is like most people like operate their AI usage like they're waiting in line at the DMV. So like basically one person takes a turn, they finish, they walk away, and then the next person goes. And so basically like nothing's parallelized. Um, People are sitting there like prompting, waiting, prompting, waiting. Um, and they might use a loop like to do that. And
They
like in
are the
some
loop. They are the loop.
well, yeah,
They're
you know what I'm saying, like
like,
of
like,
like
it used to be how you got here was you used to ask the harness to do something, right? You'd ask Claude Code to do something, and let's say you asked it to do 10 things, it would come back and be like, I did three of them. And you'd be like, continue. And then it would finish. Go ahead. That the
yeah,
loop is
yeah,
really
yeah.
just repeating the prompt over and over and over again.
Yeah, so like how do you actually scale your AI usage? So like Crow's a good example of like parallelized work, where it's like you have multiple tickets that you're working on in parallel, and you can go and hand off different tasks and work kind of like sequentially, not sequentially, in parallel. Um, so like so in graph engineering, you have basically a node. A node is a unit of work. So you have an agent that does a task. For example, like researching a competitor, or writing a draft, or checking a claim, or working on a ticket. And then an edge is a dependency. So something requires an output from another thing. So it has to wait. And then the test is for every arrow in your workflow, does this step actually need the previous step's output? If not, delete the arrow and the step can run side by side. So say you're auditing a code base for security issues. File ticket A, then file B, file C, and each one waits, and it's a chain. In a graph approach, you review all the files at the same time. Each agent works independently. The only thing they wait for is the final merge where you combine all things. So here's how graph engineering works. Well, there's a couple different patterns. One is the diamond pattern, which is it's the one shape that you need most of the time. which is you take the work and you split the work out. So instead of one agent doing everything, you spawn multiple agents, each tackling a different angle: a researcher, a cost analysis, a review, a trends researcher, all at the same time. And what most people mess up is that they take all the raw output from each of those agents and they try to jam the context back into the main agent instead of basically um, synthesizing, taking the summary of the result, and then um, write a strong kind of final result from all those answers.
Mhm.
Um, so basically, the goal is that you reduce wall clock time, and it doesn't necessarily cost less tokens, um, but basically you have like you wind up with a much your context isn't muddied by having all of these different things, because really what you care about is the end result. And what happens is if you try to jam one one ticket or one agent with so many different features of what it's doing, is that you wind up having context that's overloaded, meaning like you wind up having to compact your context. And then also what you get is you could use cheap models or different models on things that may not require a more expensive model, and then use expensive models on maybe judgment or synthesis, for example.
Yeah, I mean, like LangGraph is a good example of this. If you want to go really low level, um, there's NAN and there's others that have tried to have done this. If you think about sub agents within Claude Code, like when you come into your session for the first time and it kicks off 3 or 4 explore agents to go study the code base in various areas, it's all similar to your diamond uh, example, where they're synthesizing. Like if it's going to go study a code base and it's going to do 15 tool calls of looking at files, etc., and it has a purpose of why it's doing that research. You don't need all of that tool calling context to get back to the main thread. You just need the result of the research to get back to the main thread. So it can save you tokens in some circumstances where um, your main thread doesn't fill up context, because when your sub agent is done and synthesizes and comes back to the main thread, um, you can just dump its whole history, and the main thread can just continue on with the results from the sub agents that were synthesized. So, it's kind of like a DAG is one way you could think about it. These things have been around. Like we've been
Mm-hmm.
doing, Argo workflows, and they have temporal now, and there was airflow and all these things. So it's just applying those concepts to LLMs.
Mm-hmm.
Um, even a skill in a way is kind of like a uh, probabilistic DAG or a probabilistic graph workflow. Um, but when you get into like things like temporal and actually putting a DAG around it, laying graph, etc., it's just you're stitching together your workflow in a more deterministic way so that you're not going to skip a step accidentally because the LLM decides not to do it. Um, and it's really kind of like I feel like you start off with skills. You start off with natural language graphs or natural language DAGs, um, and then once that becomes solidified to the point where it's like you rely on this thing, then you can start thinking about like maybe I build a graph around this workflow to lock it in,
Mm-hmm.
so that I can be more sort of five nines or about it in terms of reliability, as opposed to like maybe after 200 runs, one time it forgets to do a step. Um, a DAG will kind of lock it in a little bit more. Um, but but yeah, I mean that's essentially what what graph engineering would be. And
Hmm.
then there's graph rag, which is more of like how Facebook is storing their social graph and things like that. It's more of kind of like more analogous to a database. Um, and that's also becoming very big nowadays. You have Palantir and others who have kind of forged that, with their ontology. But it's becoming super important because your world is a bunch of siloed information, right? Like you got things in Slack, you got things in emails, you got things in meetings that you had in Zoom. You've got all these sources of data that could be called context, and you end up stitching together that stuff yourself. You end up, hopefully you got Gemini meeting notes in your Google Meet, so you copy and paste that into Claude, or you tell Claude to go look at the file that you downloaded that has the transcript in it, or you copy and paste things out of Slack, or maybe you have a Slack bot that can put it into Cursor, or sorry, put it into Claude Code, or all these different things to stitch things together. But what's sort of evolving and what's coming out of it, as a tech, is sort of using a graph as I'm simplifying it to a great degree, but kind of like a foreign key database, of connections between all your siloed information. And you're not necessarily pulling all the data into your graph, but you're pulling enough data into the graph that an agent can walk through the graph, find out what pieces of information are useful, and then go into those various stores and pull the things they need, put it together, have the full context, and be able to do their work. And that's becoming much more important nowadays because we're not just going to ChatGPT, asking a question, and then doing the work ourselves. The agents are more and more working autonomously. And the first step was like, how do I get the agent to do things? That was when the React workflow came out with tools. That's when tools came around, right? You started having tools, you started having multi-turns, you started to have chain of thought. Chain of
Yeah.
thought was using tools. But then what ended up happening was it didn't work for very long. The attention of the model was, it was lazy. It would do 3 things out of 10 and then ask you whether it should do the rest. So that's when loop engineering came around, which was just basically repeating the same prompt over, like the Ralph Wiggum loop. Um, then there was long-term loop engineering. Like I don't want to just loop, 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 loop until I hit some sort of success criteria. I want to run this prompt once a day because I wanted to just indefinitely keep on working at that. And that's what OpenClaw was. OpenClaw was just a long-term Ralph Wiggum loop. It was like, let me take a
Yeah.
Ralph Wiggum loop, and instead of putting it in a for loop, I'm going to put it in a cron job, right? And then let me add some like um, uh, let me give it a diary so that it can remember what it did last time it ran this prompt, so
Hmm.
it can build upon that, right?
Hmm.
And that's all OpenClaw was, right? And then it
Hmm.
was attached to like messaging and Telegram and stuff, but I just consider that like something simple.
So,
The next step after that, right, is extremely long term autonomous agents operating almost completely independent, making their own choices. And now it's not just some parlor trick with a for loop or a cron job. Now you have like infrastructure necessary in order to put all the context available in one place so that the agent can find it. Because when it's working in the middle of the night, the difference between it getting the job done correctly with full context versus doing it incorrectly, or probably more likely waiting until you come back in the morning to ask you a question, is that it has to have the whole organization's knowledge available to it so that it can go be like a normal employee. By the way, it's almost like you're an agent, right? Think about you're working at work. You're an agent, and then you're working on a task, and before you know it, you need something from somebody else, and you message them on Slack, and you find out they're on vacation, right? That's what the agent is dealing with on a daily basis. You ask it to do something, it goes and starts to do it, and it realizes I need something from the guy who asked me to do it, and it has to go back and ask that person or wait for it to respond. So that's where graph rag comes into play and sort of building the hydrating of that rag.
So to kind of keep on with, kind of this concept of kind of chaining things together. Um, so one of the things that in my research that I learned, and I guess we do it already, is why would you not have an agent review its own work? And it's very simple that agents, and it kind of goes back to what we're saying about Opus, is that agents typically are go easy on themselves, um, because all the context of what they worked on is already there. And so when you take an agent that has no context of how something got built and you give it a job to review something in a way that a code review is a good example, right? You A code review pulls down code, looks at what the ticket was, and says, "Oh, like somebody, it doesn't know that an agent built it. Maybe it does. It might know that a human built it, or which model built it. It doesn't care. It looks at it with sort of fresh eyes, and it has some context, but it's not poisoned by the fact that it built it, and it's like almost like gonna see it through fresh eyes. So the idea of having a separate agent that's on an edge, whose job is to kill it or to take an adversarial posture to try to disprove something, is one way in which you could use um, sort of, maybe it's not beneficial to chain the output necessarily. And then the other thing was is trying to disprove something. So like testing something. So I test, like, for example, like um I mean, this goes back into kind of loops, but after something is deployed, do you check it to see if there are pipeline failures, or you have nightly builds that run, or you checking the logs to make sure that something that you didn't see while you were building your code now got deployed into production, or something changed in the environment that was completely unrelated to anything that you did, or a side effect. Um, so yeah, these are some examples of um, why graph engineering might be useful.
What graph engineering is going to enable, along with graph rag, is extremely long-term agents. The idea that like the agent that you're using to code, um, not only now can babysit your PR to being merged, meaning fixing merge conflicts and fixing CI failures and um, you know uh, responding to code reviews and fixing those issues and things like that, and ushering the PR to be merged and deployed or whatnot, which a lot of engineering shops have either figured out or know that they want that. It's something that is very doable, and we've had that for quite some time now. But also now you're going to be able to get to like extremely long-term ownership. So the idea that like the agent is going to not only usher the ticket through a merge, but then it's not done. It wakes up like a week later, or it wakes up after the deployment and checks that the feature works.
Mm-hmm.
And then maybe it wakes up a week later and checks usage. And then maybe it wakes up a year later and says, are enough people using this, or should I propose that this feature should be killed? There's so many things and when I say wake up, it's not like it goes to sleep. These things are kind of stateless in a way. And, to go back to your code review example or test example, you know, I don't necessarily think that you need a whole new agent to to code review. You just need an agent that doesn't remember building it itself, right? You need the agent to not have the context from the building, because
Yeah.
if it built it itself, then when you ask it to test it, it's going to have the same myopic problems that led it to not have that
Yep.
test in the first place,
Yep.
right? To make that mistake in the first place. But if you erase its memory, then if it comes in context clean and is asked to test it, it's going to go down pathways it didn't think about, perhaps. It's kind of similar to in engineering where they say an engineer should never review their own code. Well, unless if I could erase their knowledge of writing the code, then they could test and review their own code because they would be like a new person, um, looking at it as an outsider.
Yeah, well, yeah, that's exactly what I'm saying. New agent, I mean, is probably overstating it, but the idea is that like you have these independent things that can run maybe not at the same time, um, but don't require the context of another agent. But in some cases, you do want it to require the context of another agent. And I guess loosely it does because it's saying here's this pull request and um here's this pull request, here's this ticket, here's all this other information about it, but look at it through a different lens. So I think yeah, and there's cases where you don't want to use a graph, like you don't necessarily want to do it for something small.
Mm-hmm.
Um, but a couple of things that I think are implicit benefits are that you get the ability to do cost optimization, which I think is going to become more important in the coming months, years, where people are starting. I think many organizations are locked into a single model. They sign a contract with a single model provider. And I think that people will start to see the value in needing to pick the right model for the right job. I also think that it's a bit of a smell to like use the $1 million token context. Like the fact that you need that many tokens to me is a problem. I think there's certainly use cases like research where you might want to do that. But regardless of that, a job that requires that many tokens is going to be very expensive. It's going to take a lot of time. And you get collapse when you start getting to context that big, meaning that the model starts breaking down if it has to think about a million things at once. And so if you can decompose what you're doing and parallelize it and then synthesize, you wind up being more efficient with your token usage and probably not only save time, but save money. And then you get repeatability, right? Which is like
Mm-hmm.
if you're doing something over and over again, you can um, you can explain your workflow as a graph, and then you can have that be repeated over and over again. Like the code review process that we use in Crow is a graph, right? It's a loosely defined graph, but the rules of the graph are embedded in Crow, which is I take a ticket, I work on it, I open a pull request, I assign someone to review it, a review kicks off, it pings pongs back and forth, refine, review, refine, review. It's done. I merge it. I check to see after it's merged, were there any errors? Another loop kicks off and checks the logs. So, like, we do graph engineering every day. It's like, it's not a DAG that's defined anywhere in like Airflow or temporal. It's defined through code, through rules
Mm-hmm.
that are predefined. And because of that, Crow provides you not sales pitch, but even just the change last week to Crow, where we moved away from long running code reviews to code reviews that happen and then they're what I would call like temporary code reviews. And the code reviews are super dumb now, which is great because it looks at it through fresh eyes every time. It looks at the
Mm-hmm.
last comment, but it's it's like more efficient now. So because it's using less tokens and not building up context that it doesn't need. And so anyway, that's my
Yeah, no,
spiel on graph engineering.
No, I agree. It's we kind of operate a graph, but we our graph is not our graph. We have many graphs, right? Like we have a instead of having one large epic graph from beginning to end of a ticket, we have many small graphs, and then the engineer has the flexibility to choose what graph
Mm-hmm.
they're what state or what stage they're in of the graph. Like, okay, this is ready for review, and then the review babysitting graph takes over, and they can kind of turn their attention to another ticket. We probably will do an epic graph end to end. You know, we're somewhat resistant of that because the models just aren't capable of being perfect at certain things. So it's nice to have like, sanity checks every once in a while to glance at. Um, it's the difference between like if you delegate a task to somebody, do you get a report daily about what they did? Or do you just go, I don't even need to know what you're doing anymore? Right? It depends on how much you trust the person or thing that you delegate to. And in many cases, the frontier models are not quite trustworthy enough that they could just work for a year on something without you looking at it every once in a while. And not only that, but like even though they're good at it now, you know, Anthropic will come out with another model and the harness will automatically start using that model, or you'll start using it because you think it's better. And then it will suck at things that it used to do great. And maybe it'll be great at things that it used to suck at. And then you should start taking down pieces of your graph that were meant to solve that problem in an earlier model. So, for people that are thinking that they're going to build a workflow that stands the test of time and one shot some epic to completion and perfectly every time without a human looking at it, um, you're not sitting upon stable ground. The model is moving out from underneath you all the time.
Mm-hmm.
So it's hubris to think that you're not going to have to check in every once in a while to make sure what was working last month is still working this month.
Yeah.
And, it's a perfect example. Our code reviews were dialed in to the point where we don't even really watch them anymore. And then all of a sudden, we started realizing, and by the way, all of a sudden isn't like we noticed it on the first day. We noticed it maybe a couple of days in that, hey, why are we 15 rounds of code reviews in? Why are our tokens going down faster? Um, it's because, a fix that used to have like one, two, maybe three back and forths on a code review. Now we're getting 20 back and forths on a code review, right?
Yeah.
Um, so yeah, I mean, there there's still limitations to these models, right? They're not, and the harnesses themselves as well. So you still have to operate this and supervise it. Um, the level of supervisation, I guess, is the word. The number of the amount of supervision that's necessary is very small, right? But you do have to check in every once in a while and make sure that your axioms are still intact when it comes to what you've built in the past. It's not like deterministic code that, once something works, it's going to work, assuming you don't, upgrade your operating system or dependency. This thing moves out from underneath you. Even when you're using the same model, you could be using 4.8 today and 4.8 tomorrow is a little bit different, you know,
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
because they can dial back the intelligence on the server side to, make their margins work on their side.
Yeah, for sure. So before we close out, I know that there's been a couple of announcements by SpaceX in the last 24 hours. Grok 4.6, Grokbot is in beta. Um, First gut check on Grokbot.
I like it. I used it for the first time the other day. I upgraded whatever accounts necessary in order to get on the beta. And it's kind of like Cowork, maybe in a little bit of a different form factor in terms of software. Uh, so it's kind of like a messaging app, but each contact on your messaging app is a different bot you can create. And a bot, I believe, in their mind is kind of one to one with like an employee or a job function. So you'd have like maybe a marketer bot or something like that. And each bot can have connections or tools. So you could say this bot has access to my email, and this bot has access to my Slack or my, um, it's very open clawish in a sense, but and similar to Cowork, um, but improves upon OpenClaw for sure. Improves upon that to a great degree, but is possibly a slightly different way of getting at stuff than Cowork does. So you could create, like your chief of staff, and it, organizes your schedule and has your calendar, and another one looks at your email and keeps your email managed. And then you have another one that maybe, hooks into some internal MCP you have at your company that can get company data. Um, and then you can put these things into group chats with each other, and then they can start chaining with each other. So you
Mm-hmm.
could say, um, hey, company uh, knowledge worker, study all the meetings that our company had in the last day and come up with this or that, analysis, and then send an email to such and such and add a calendar invite for a meeting to discuss this with an agenda. And all of your bots that have various tools and various functions, if they're in the group chat together where you say that, they'll all work together to get that job done. So the knowledge worker will go study your organization, the graph rag, go look at the graph rag, figure out what happened in meetings or et cetera. Um, you know, the maybe reach out to people on Slack and ask them questions, you know, uh, then come up with the analysis, send it over to the chief of staff who sends out an email and makes a calendar invite with the appropriate people, that kind of thing. So it's in its early stages. Uh, I saw lots of really cool things, but then I also saw some bugs. Like for instance, I tried to hook up Slack and it didn't even have a button for authenticating, even though it said it should. So I wasn't able to get that hooked up. But I had it sending emails, I had it cleaning up my inbox, I had it making appointments, I had it uh, logging into internal company systems. One last thing I'll say about it is that there's a VM behind each of the bots, so it's actually operating its own computer. Um, and what that means is that it's not reliant on MCP for everything, and it can actually open up a web browser, go into LinkedIn, click around, make posts for you, all that kind of stuff that would normally be blocked by LinkedIn because they don't want you to automate things. They don't even have an API that you could use. Um, you can get around all those things with Grokbot because it's able to click around on websites, and apparently you can even train it. You can show it your usage of doing something on a website, and it will replicate that and understand how to do that in the future. Um, so, there's some awkward parts where like, if you say, hey, go on LinkedIn and, write up a company profile for me by looking at my history, uh, it might do something like ask you to look at the the VM window will come up and you'll have to go type in your password into LinkedIn and log it in and then go back to it and say, okay, it's logged in. It does a pretty darn good job of making that uh, as painless as possible. But there are, you know, as with anything that's going to use websites that it has to log into as a user clicking around, you're going to have to take over at the login and then tell it, okay, it's logged in. You can go finish your job. So it's in its early stages, but looks pretty promising. Looks like it's definitely a competitor of Cowork.
Nice. Cool. And I guess we'll see about Grok 4.6. I know you saw some early net numbers on it.
Yeah, I haven't got a chance to use it yet. I'm very excited to start using it. I know some of the benchmarks say it's in the running with Fable on some things, so we'll have to see.
All right, everybody. Thanks